thorough study of the four Gospels and the rest of the New Testament will not get you almost any of the traditions that Christians have been celebrating for 1,500 years when it comes to Christmas. Where did we figure out what day Jesus was born? Why do we have a pine tree in almost every home? What is with the 12 days of Christmas? Where did that start? There's two general ways that I've seen a lot of people handle these questions. One, head in the sand, forget about it. It doesn't matter. It was bigger than me. I don't care. I don't think that's particularly helpful, especially not for an inquisitive mind. For people who then, the other side of the token, the people who do the surface level of investigation to find out, they get into the kind of the conspiracy levels. Well, you know, the church was just co-opting pagan holidays, and none of this is all tied to other religions, and we shouldn't celebrate it at all. Or you shouldn't, it has nothing to teach the church. I'm here to propose a different way. I want to talk about some of the traditions, like today. The day of this recording is December 25th, when this recording goes live. And I want to tell you why this is the day we celebrated Christmas. But before I do, I want to clear the slate. There is a reading of this history, and an accurate one, that the Christian church did a lot of conquering. I fully accept that the church oppressed some of its way into these traditions and appropriated them from other religions. And that did harm. It did. And I'm not wiping that away. I also want to put forward this proposal that not every appropriation is done with malicious intent, but done with a sense that the world reflects the heart of Jesus. That Jesus is already in all the world religions. And when we find them, we celebrate them. And it just so happens that on Christmas, or the way the history happened, we appropriated them and they took. So, to get into it, Christmas Day. Originally, Christianity, we didn't, like the first 300-400 years, we didn't celebrate Christmas, right? Look at the four Gospels. There's a little bit in Matthew. Most of what you know about Christmas comes from the Gospel of Luke, the best named Gospel. But nothing in John that we would recognize as Christmas, and nothing in Mark. So these are areas, whole regions, in the first couple hundred years of Christianity, we didn't have a Bible. So you might have been in an area you knew nothing about Christmas. You knew nothing about the birth of Jesus. And so what was the festival? Well, we only had one main festival, and that's Easter. It's still the primary religious observance, the primary feast, the primary party. The reason we have our faith at all is Easter. Christmas is then bonus. So, as Christianity moved from the Mediterranean Sea north, we encountered a tradition called the Celts. Once we got past the Alps, the mountain range, we encountered the Celts. The Celts are not just a section of Ireland. Some people think that. It's because of popular understanding. But the Celtic tradition moved all the way south to Turkey. But it never went past the Alps into that area of the Mediterranean Sea. One of the things that was very dominant amongst the Celtic practice, spiritual practice, is an awareness of weather and seasons. They needed this far more than their Mediterranean sisters and brothers because the cold climates of Northern Europe could be deadly. You had to survive. And so recognizing how dark it got, how scary it could be to go into winter. They wanted to not have it go that bad, right? The Celts, knowing the seasons and feeling the seasons, they then take this dichotomy and the emotional journey that is that and set up spiritual practices and traditions that undergird a way to live through them. They are deeply connected to the earth, to the times, and to the weather. Now, Christianity encounters this and says, we believe that Jesus is already here. God made all things. All things came from Jesus. So where is Jesus already? Now, the Celts, their singular holiday was the winter solstice, spring solstice as well, but for the winter solstice, that is the day, in case you don't know, that the amount of light in the day is the shortest amount of sunlight. Now, you and I, we live in a world where, my phone tells me exactly the ancient when the sun comes up, when the sun goes down. We know what day the solstice is going to be exactly. Now, the Celts, they didn't have that. They had a sense that the world was participatory, that the universe depended on their spiritual practices. It was an interdependent world. So they had to prepare for the solstice, the Advent, the Adventist solstice. Heard the word Advent before? It was a way of getting everything ready for the deepest dark. And then light would be reborn the day after the solstice. Then the light starts growing. You can see how our ancient Christian brothers and sisters heard this and said, we know that story. We actually know about the deepest darkness and where light was born. We have a story like that. And when everything's in flux, they said, this is how we will celebrate the birth and the rebirth. Because that's what Advent ends up telling us. It's like that hidden gem within the liturgy, is it's a reminder that Jesus is still coming every year. Now, the day of the solstice, originally, for those 100 years, like from 600 BC to 300 and 400 something, was always December 25th. So we set it, Christmas on the solstice. Now, for those of you who do pay attention, the solstice doesn't set on December 25th. The reason it changed was this was under the Julian calendar. We were still functioning under a previous calendar, the Julian calendar, and it didn't have leap days or leap years, which is fine. You wouldn't notice a day in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. You're not noticing the change without the number of days. But a couple hundred years, and suddenly December 25th is in the spring. You can't have that. So a new calendar, Pope Gregory, deep into chant, he sets up a whole new calendar, the Gregorian calendar. Now, the Gregorian calendar sets up a leap year, and it gives us the proper amount of days in the year, but it moves the solstice to 3 days before December 25th. And I don't know this. It's truthiness. I know it down here to be true, that there are documents, dusty, cobweb-filled, covered in the basement of the Vatican City, that has our ancient sisters and brothers arguing about whether or not they should change Christmas. You knew that there's going to be a camp that said, we've always done it this way, let's just leave it. And you also have people who are like, it's connected, we know we're connected to the deeper roots of our tradition, it's got to be on the solstice. But I think the argument that won out is that it's in a hint of what I said. When the solstice moved, it was 3 days before Christmas Day. I think the church leaders said, this is even better. You see, you have the deepest dark, which happened Wednesday, this last Wednesday. The deepest darkness. And then 3 days later, light is born. Where does that sound familiar? In the Christian tradition, and it ties it more beautifully. You see, and that becomes the new evangelistic message, how we can tell the Celts, you already know the good news of Jesus Christ. It's born in the world. Your deepest darkness, our Lord is born. The new light of the world is born 3 days after, which, by the way, is how long it takes for the human eye and sundials to be able to register the growth of the sun. It's 3 days, the amount of time. So that's how we get December the 25th. And as we're trying to communicate this, we're like, okay, so what are your practices? Well, for the center image of the winter solstice, the center image of the Celtic tradition is the sacred tree. You may have seen it. I might be able to do something. The sacred tree stretches up into the sky and has the the oak. Before the fern, before the pine tree, it was the oak. The oak that stretches up into the sky and also shows you deep into the roots. It combines the things of life and life eternal and the ground, the dirt, the two elements that you really need in an agrarian society. And the sacred oak, which was seen as the light bringer because oaks grew taller than most of the other trees in Northern Europe, so they were frequently struck by lightning, and it was believed that that was how fire came into the world. On the solstice, to celebrate the coming of fire, celebrate the coming of the light, Northern Celts decorated their sacred tree. It wasn't like cut down and brought into everybody else. There was one in the center of the community. And in order to celebrate the solstice, the hope that the darkness would fade, that light would be reborn, to celebrate this, they would bring dried fruit preserves, and they would hang them on the tree along with candles, which talk about a fire hazard, but forget about it. But you hang a dried fruit on the tree. Now, Christianity could have seen this and gone, you're worshiping a tree, forget about it. But you've already thought about it. Like that's the connection to our tree. That's how we get our Christmas tree. But it's better. Christianity saw this and said, oh, we know. We want this tradition. We like this tradition because it is the birth of Jesus that invites us to re-enter the Garden of Eden. That relationship that Adam and Eve had with God, the easy friendship, we have that tree. And in fact, we did change, actually December the 25th, up until about 300 years ago, was called the Feast of Adam and Eve. It's worth a Wikipedia. The tree that we encounter actually changes for us the shape of the cross. It moves. Originally, for the first couple hundred years of Christianity, the cross for Christians was a plus sign. It was equidistant, right? But when we encounter the Celts and we see the sacred tree, we see that the tree is this connective tissue for the whole of the continent. We move the crossbeam up, and it becomes an icon. It becomes an image bearing the reflection of the sacred oak of the tree for the Celts. The evangelistic mission is to go to a people and listen. When we are at our best, again, there's a lot of oppression, a lot of do what we say, and a lot of this is mine. Yes. But evangelism, the spreading of the good news, when it's at its best, is going to a different people and saying, tell me your stories, and listening to them, knowing that Jesus is already there. Stop, my sisters and brothers, thinking that you're taking God to the heathens, that you're bringing Jesus somewhere. Jesus was there way before you got there. We don't bring Jesus. We become aware of where Jesus already is. One last, could say this. The day after the solstice, so the thing about the solstice, it teaches us that deep spiritual practice. What to do with this time. So if this is the furthest away from harvest and planting, what do you do? If this is the scariest time, one is to be assured that light is being reborn, that in the deepest darkness, this is where light goes to be reborn. The next 13 days of the solstice, the next celebration was dedicated to the goddess. And it was dedicated in a couple of different ways. There was 13 days of this. In particular, the first day after the solstice, so in the ancient tradition, it would have been December 26th, they would take a wren, which is a symbol, I can get into the weeds, but they would take a wren as a reminder, kill it, sacrifice it, spill its blood, and the blood would fall, and it's a reminder that new life, this light that's coming into the world, in order to bring about new life, blood is required. That sacrifice is part of it. Is part of how the regenerative body of this world, that the shedding of blood. Now, this is mostly a practice for men and boys because women in their very bodies know the shedding of blood is part of it. Which just reminds me, men and boys have to learn what women already know. Shocking. Now, then you take, after you've sacrificed the wren, after this blood is spilled, you take your preserves and you go to the needy. You go to those who can't make it through the winter as presents in boxes. Look at your calendars I know you got a free one lying around somewhere. What's December 26th? It's not Boxing Day. It's Boxing Day, where you give gifts to the needy, not to family members, but to everybody. Now the church, we got a hold of this and we were like, we want nothing to do with your wren. But what we do want, we do understand that sacrifice, even from us, is needed to be part of the regenerative energy of the earth, to be reminded and celebrated. And we have a story like that of someone who went out and did great things for the community, both dollars and cents, food for the hungry, and had to shed blood. That was the first martyr of the church, St. Stephen, which is where we get St. Stephen's Day. I don't know if that rings for you, if you knew what St. Stephen's Day was or why it was December 26th. It was us trying to make sense of Boxing Day for the Celts. Now that is the second day of the winter solstice celebration of the goddess. Christians see this and we want none of it. We actually get the 12 days of Christmas. We just we ignore December 25th. Every kid who heard about the 12 days of Christmas, well, one, if you got it wrong by putting it 12 days ahead of Christmas, sure. But the 12 days after Christmas, it's January 6th. Like, you could put up a calendar. It's 13 days. We just don't count Christmas Day. Why? Because we're a little too proudful. We didn't want to rip off the solstice whole cloth. Oh, gosh. This whole practice of Christmas and how we got here, the reason this is important isn't just education. We're standing at a nexus point in the Christian church. we will try to reach and teach the next generation. The number of people who have grown up without any understanding of church is growing. How will we reach them? Will they try to fit them and squeeze them into this understanding that we already have had? Or will we dare to be like our forefathers and mothers who saw people who were different from us and with open ears and open hands both heard the stories of them, received them with respect, and looked and celebrated where we saw Jesus? That is the lesson of the history of Christmas. To hear someone different from you and knowing deep down God is in their life already. And where it is, celebrate it. Merry Christmas, everybody. May your holiday be enriched, deepened, heightened. May you, with your power, with this celebration, go and spread the growing light in the world that has been reborn in you. May this time teach you. May the darkness that has been growing in our very world and now slowing down, and so that the light is being reborn again and the days are getting longer. May this teach you what to do when it is dark in your life. That the response to darkness is not isolation, but giving. May the practices of our Celtic brothers and sisters that have been put through the Christian lens shape you to be a more giving, celebratory, and welcoming follower of Jesus. Merry Christmas. God bless.